Hello and welcome to the fifth part of the video tutorial series about modding Falcon BMS, and in this part I will introduce you to weapons and how weapons are implemented in Falcon BMS. Due to the complexity of the subject matter, I will break down this particular part in multiple subparts. So in this first main part 5.0 I will cover the general aspects. I will also dive into details, and in subsequent parts I will show you some things in practice, such as creating a new weapon or modifying a weapon, changing its guidance, and so on. So let's get started. What defines a weapon in Falcon BMS? You of course need the external 3D model and textures. We have covered this subject matter in previous videos, so I don't want to repeat it now in detail. As explained in previous videos, models and textures are located in the tear data objects subfolder, and here you have the models folder, Courier OBJ for the textures, Courier OBJ high-res if high resolution textures exists, and that's everything. So we can directly move on with the database. The editor is already opened. A weapon in Falcon BMS consists of at least 3 database record entries impacting 3 different XML files. The first one is the class table. The other one are the weapons control data and the sim weapons data. For weapons, which are stores carriers, so to speak, with submunitions, we have also the rockets or RKT database file. So let's go through these in a minute. Weapons may, dependent on the type, also include dedicated weapon data file, but that really depends on the weapon. So now let's get started with the database part. In the class table, which is, so to speak, the key file of the database, you have an entry, a record entry for every single object that is defined within the database. So if you want to add something to the database, it is necessary to create at least one corresponding CT record. At the top here you can filter between the different record types, so to speak. We have now weapons, and you can also more closely specify what class of weapons it is. Let's simply take the CAP 250 Taurus standoff missile. So at the top you see the CT record number. It's also it's the index number here displayed to the left side. So anytime some file, other database file or external file requires the CT number to be specified to point to this specific object, in this case the Taurus missile, you would have to enter the number 143. Then we have the class data section here at the top. We have the domain, in this case air, because those weapons are airborne weapons. Next one is, in this case, vehicle. It might depend on the weapon types. That's also weapon selected. The owner is normal by default. Next we define the type. In this case missile. We have also different other options that we can select here, and then we have the subtype. It defines, okay, the Taurus is an air-to-ground weapon, and then we have the specific number. It's important that dependent on the domain selected, let's change it for a while, we can you get different options displayed here, okay? It depends on the domain, and when you then you have specific classes. When you select a particular class from this domain, then also the type and subtype will change accordingly. So let's switch to default. The specific number is for weapons insofar important that it may impact the guidance. That's something that I will illustrate in another video in the future. It's just important to keep in mind if you want to use a specific guidance system for a specific weapon, you should ensure that things like type, subtype, and specific number are the same as for other weapons that use this guidance, okay? This one is for weapons by default, weapon, and dependent on the domain and the class and type, subtype selected. The pointers here point to different files. So for a weapon, it would be the weapon control data, and it would be sim weapon data. These will be covered in a while. Then we have the graphics section. In most cases, you have only the normal field populated. That's a model number. You can view the model. That's a Taurus missile. Okay. There can also be additional models related to a single CT record. For example, if you have buildings or something like that, there might be additional models for destroyed or damaged and so on. The entity type data, they are created by default. I can't really tell what the difference is and have never edited them, so you typically don't need to touch them at all. Of course, you can have a look at similar objects and check out whether there's something different, but I don't think that's really necessary. It's best to not touch this particular field. Okay, let's move on with a weapon control data. You can directly open the tier. As you can see, you can return back at any time to the CT record by open CT data. You have also the appropriate number displayed here. So if you were to change the CT record, if you have created a different one for whatever reason, you could simply change the number and it would use a different CT record. Here is a name defined for this weapon. And this is not only the name displayed in the database, it is actually the name that will be displayed in the user interface in-game, so in mission briefings, but also on the weapon loadout screen, it is this name that's being displayed. Here at the top you have a number of checkboxes. Which checkbox is being used is dependent on the weapon type that you use. I don't know about all of these entries here. Recon is certainly ticked when it's a reconnaissance pod, cluster for cluster munitions, fuel for fuel tank, bomb warhead. I'm not sure what it actually impacts or how it impacts the weapon. This ammo is 1/10 is probably mostly for guns of relevance and how gun rounds are displayed in cockpit, whether the accurate gun round or intense. ECM only for ECM pods, tracers of relevance for all shades, so gun rounds and so on. Always rec would essentially mean that this weapon can only be loaded to rec use for BAE CAS. This is in this case apparently grayed out, so it cannot be enabled. It certainly depends on the weapon type, whether this field is active or not. Area effect, I don't think it's needed for the Taurus. That's more of relevance for cluster bomb munitions, but I'm not entirely sure what it really means or how it plays out in them. It's best to always compare to other similar weapon types, especially if you're creating a new weapon. Check out what is ticked here in load pairwise. Okay, probably means you can really only load these weapons in pairs. That means also on a weapon loadout screen you probably click on one pylon for this weapon and the other is automatically populated. I've never tried this, and it's I don't know whether it's actually being used at all. Surgeon LGB is for third generation laser guided bombs. It's an important field, for example, for dual mode bombs like the GBU-54L JDAM or similar weapons. Bomb drop sound. Yeah, plays a bomb drop sound, but I think this is not necessary because you have also sounds defined in the weapon data file. As far as bomb GPS is concerned, it's of relevance for GPS guided weapons. It's not just bomb and bomb WCMD, so wine corrected munition dispensers. Hit chance is actually defining whether the weapon can be employed against these different target types, and the different numbers here define the hit chance. So a hit chance of 0 means this weapon is ineffective against these types of targets. But as far as I understand it, it's only of relevance for the 2D AI, so it's not really of relevance for you. And the hit chance of 40 doesn't mean that when you deploy the weapon in them that only 40% of all missiles will strike its target, but it may be the case in the 2D world. Okay, then we have some weapon specific data such as weight, drag that's being added, and range. Range is not impacting the actual range when you use this weapon in the 3D simulation. It seems to be used as kind of a range limit when 2D AI units employ this weapon. Then you have the damage type. It's more or less the type of warhead that's being used. The amount of damage, the blast radius when it detonates. These fields are not populated. Vehicle list, no idea what it means. Even those who created this field didn't know it. Probably not originally, but those who created the editor. Min-alt, max-alt is probably defining at what altitudes these weapons can be released. If it's 0, it's probably unlimited. Guidance, here I have the different guidance types. It's important that it's not the only section where you have to select guidance. I will come to this later on. Seeker radar is only for radar guided weapons. In this case it's not relevant. Same actually also for the infrared seeker, for example. It's grayed out here because you can't change it here. You need to edit it in the weapon data file. Firing rate is more of a relevance for guns, so you can define the firing rate in rounds per second for a gun. Rarity, no idea what that is. Bullet speed defaults to 256 for most weapons. For guns you can essentially define the muzzle velocity of those weapons. Bullet dispersions is also of relevance for guns in the first place, so it more or less defines how widespread the gun rounds are in the area if you fire. So 0 means it's extremely precise, but for a weapon like this it's irrelevant. For a gun it essentially means 0 would be an extremely accurate gun, but you have little tolerance. Bullet time to leave, to be honest, I don't know how this is actually processed or what it really means. You have here also rounds per second for guns. I'm not sure, maybe this one is more for weapons and defines how much are released with a single trigger. I'm not sure about this. Bomb warhead CT is seemingly a new entry. I'm not exactly sure what it is. Service start year and service end year. If there are probably campaigns or TE missions which have a specified date, those weapons are available or unavailable. If there are data entered here and the date of the mission or campaign is preceding or exceeding these data. So 0 and 9999 means it doesn't matter, the weapon is always available. Okay, you can from the weapon data also directly access the Zim weapons data. It's the same as here. Okay, you can also access the weapons data directly from the CT record. In the weapons data, the name here is the one that's displayed in the store's management system or selective jettison page in the cockpit. These flags has display trainable. Simply check out how it's in equivalent weapons and mirror the configurations just to be sure. Trainable may relate to in-sim, but that's speculation. I don't know whether if you put the weapons arm switch into the Zim position, whether it's meant with trainable or not. Then you have weapon domain. Yes, no weapon, air weapon. So no weapon would, for example, be for a non-weapon store like a drop tank. In this case, we have a ground weapon. We have class air to ground. Okay, as typically used for air-to-ground missiles. So you have separate classes for anti-radiation missiles, HARM in this case, or gated bombs units. Then the weapon type is essentially also guidance. And that's what I say. It's very important that in both weapon control data, Zim weapon data, and also with regards to the type-subtype specific definitions, as well as in the weapon data file, if one exists for the weapon type, that it is really defined in a defined configuration. So if you're unsure, if you want to change the guidance of a weapon, check out a weapon that works the way you want it to work, and then compare all of these entries that they are matching. That's very important. Otherwise, the weapon may not work or may not work probably. So that's very important here. Weight, I'm not sure what this entry means, because the actual weight of the weapon, that's also accounted for in the gross weight calculations in the weapon loadout screens, is the one in the weapon control data. Same for drag and area. Why that eject may impact in which direction a weapon is possibly jettisoned, I'm not entirely sure. Same for X. And then we have the missile pointer, and that one is very important. These fields here are typically, I leave them the way they are, or compared to other similar weapons, but typically you can leave them as they are if you want to change how a weapon is displayed, change the weapon name, and otherwise just ensure that here the combination of domain, class, and weapon type is corresponding correctly to the guidance settings in the weapon control data. The missile pointer is actually a pointer to the weapon data file. So in this case, Cap 350 Taurus is a missile. Yes, it's an air-to-ground missile defined as such. So weapon data files for this, we have two subfolders, bomb data and miss data. Let's cover the miss data. In this case, we should have a Taurus DAT file. That's this one. It's been slightly modified by me. What is important is the mistypes list. This one. So if you add a new weapon DAT file, you need to add it here to this list. Only includes the name of the DAT file without the DAT ending. The rest must be the same, and this ensures that the weapon is recognized. It's very important that you don't add it in between, but at the end, because the lines are the missile pointers. And that means if you add something in between, everything else will move down, and then the missile pointers for various weapons will be wrong. So really add it to the end. If you add something new, unlike you have something like unused and you want to use it, then you can of course overwrite them as they are unused, but it's generally the better idea to add them to the end. And it's very important, if you add an entry, increase the count up here. So it's currently 228. If I would add a new DAT file, yes, I add here a line X, Y, Z, then I would have to create a corresponding XYZ DAT. Okay, and in this case you would need to increment up by 1. Of course, if you add more new DAT files, then you have incremented by the amount accordingly. What's very important to note is that the line number is not exactly the same. So we have the Taurus here, and it's actually line 198, and the missile pointer is in the sim weapon data was 196. And that means if you would add a new weapon here, it states 228 in this line, it would be 330. You have to subtract 2, so in the missile pointer you would now add 228 instead of 230 to ensure that it's correctly linking. Okay. I have seen there have been differences. Sometimes it's only one, so it's always wise that you check out the mistypes list, compare to an existing weapon, what line entry is it, and what's its missile pointer, so you know the difference. And if you add a new weapon, then simply subtract the difference accordingly, 1 or 2 maybe. Okay, we don't save this now. So that's essentially everything about the weapons generally spoken. We want to have a brief look at submunition carriers. So this comprises unguided rocket launchers, cluster bombs, as well as bomblet dispensers. What's important here is that you have essentially 2 weapons. Okay, you have the basic weapons such as a CBU 104, a wine corrected munition dispenser, And you also have the submunition defined. Okay, so if you open this entry, then you have the pod, so to speak, the submunitions carrying device, let's call it this way, and then you have the particular weapon, which is a bomblet, the unguided rocket, whatever, and each of these has a corresponding record entry under weapon control data, and also the corresponding CT record entry and SIM weapon data, and here you can define the count of submunitions, so to speak. Okay, that's thus far important to know. So let's now have a look again at a weapon data file. So you have some input data, such as the maximum flight time, for example. So even if the missile could fly in theory longer because you have a motor burning time of 70 seconds or whatever, the weapon would not be able to fly more than 65 seconds, so to speak. Its battery is gone. You can also select the PK here, probability of kills for older missiles, if you want to make a difference here. This can be set, weight of missile, weight of propellant, and so on. I don't want to cover everything here. It's at least very important for the guidance that you also, if you create a new weapon or if you want to change the guidance in a particular weapon, these guidance information are very important. So they should be ideally aligned. Of course, you can change some of the gimbals and so on, or the data or lofting bias and amount of G missile is pulling when it's lofting and so on, but ensure that at least the configuration matches. So if there's an autopilot bandwidth defined, ensure that your weapon, which should use the same guidance, has also an autopilot defined. Here you actually select the seeker type that's then displayed under weapon control data, and also the seeker record entry, and that's why it's grayed out under weapon data that's here. And yes. That's the reason for it. So you have here further performance data, missile loft time, and so on. As said, I won't cover all of them. It's not trivial if you don't understand what all these entries mean and how they work out in detail. Play around with it at your own risk. I will not make any specific recommendations here. What's important to note is that there are specific breakpoints here, number of on-ship velocity breakpoints and other breakpoints which will impact the dynamic launch zone. So if you change the performance of the missile by modifying, for example, its burning duration or its thrust data and so on, the missile will fly farther, but the calculation for weapon release, so maximum weapon firing range and so on, will stay the same. You would have to update these tables here to match the performance, but that's not really easy to do. There are tools out there available, not publicly so, and that's the main problem for this one. Here you have the auxiliary data. it also covers all kinds of information, maybe of importance. The engine location, especially for powered weapons, with the missile plum, if it's not showing up correctly, so the missile plum seems to be inside the missile or too far away, then that's owed that this position isn't matching the model dimensions accordingly. Whether it has a mistrail or contrail, you can define such stuff here. It covers, so to speak, everything, but not everything is of relevance for every single weapon type. A lot of things are self-explaining, others are not necessarily self-explaining, and it's simply important if you create a new weapon, take another weapon that works the way your new weapon is supposed to work, and then compare the entries which are of relevance here. You can, for example, also set pickle delay time. So how long do you need to press the pickle before the weapon is released? And so on. Second stage for rocket motors with particular with multiple stages, for example, and so on. Here you have links to the sounds that are being used. Here you have specific definitions of the graphical files, partially, and so on. Okay. So that's quite crude, I know, I understand, but it would become way too long. And to be honest, I don't know every single entry here. It's not like there's a great tutorial or existing guide manual or whatever out, so you need to understand what's defined here, and if you don't need it, then better don't touch it. That's important here. Okay, so let's take a brief look at bomb data. It's important that not every bomb has dedicated bomb data, and what you actually see here, it's merely defining the kind of graphic files that will be used for the explosion, for example. For some weapons or weapon types, it's different. For example, here for rocket launchers, we can define the salvo sizes, specific weapon IDs if you want, and so on. That's all not defined here because there's a hashtag in front of it, but it should in theory work. I have not worked with the rockets so far, so some things are apparently somehow redundant, so such as low rounds, so that's also defined here. The number is a low rounds would here be the case of count, so that's possibly the reason why it's no longer active. I don't know whether it would still work or not. You will generally figure if modding that there are entries that seem to be superfluous. Some might be inherited from older versions and are no longer applicable or superseded because stuff is defined differently, as here in the case, for example. Yes, and that's generally that what you need to know about the weapons in general. As said, reverse engineering is no crime. Simply, if you want to create a new weapon or a new weapon typically, or if you want to change the guidance, the way a weapon works in comparison to an existing weapon, then you need to find a weapon that works the way you intend your own weapon to work, and then try to reverse engineer, in this case, the entries, so to speak. Really ensure that for the class table, this basic entries, domain, class, type, subtype, and specific are identical. Yes. And if you open the weapon control data, ensure for the same type or similar type of weapon that you have the same checkboxes ticked, and ensure also that the guidance here is correctly defined, and that in the weapon data you have also certain weapon class, weapon type correctly defined, and then typically in conjunction with the aforementioned record entries in the weapon.dat file, then it should work. But I will follow up with a video where we have some practical examples so that you can see how I'm doing this. So I hope you found this video informative so far. Might be in some cases sound a little bit weird, but it's complex generally spoken, but also not too complex. And yes, it's always good if you don't do too much, if you are unsure what impact something has. Best make a backup of the corresponding files. So just in case that you mess something up and don't remember exactly where you have messed something up, that you can copy back the old pre-modification state or the last working modification state. Okay, that's all for this session, so stay tuned for the next videos where we go into actual practice. Thank you for watching and see you next time. Bye.